I'm Jessica. Welcome to Fish Miracles Podcast, where we share stories about miracles and Godwinks to encourage and uplift each other and to remind us that God's power has no limits. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. Our Father is infinite, sovereign, and holy. Welcome back to Fish Miracles Podcast. This is part 2 of my Abuelita Clara's miracle stories. If you haven't seen part 1, click on the link in the description below and be sure to watch that episode first and then come back to this one. Today we will be talking about Clara and the family's survival story from the deadliest earthquake in Chilean history, the earthquake known as the Chillán earthquake of 1939. The earthquake started at 11:32 at night on Tuesday, January 24th, 1939. There were no foreshocks that day to warn people that it was coming, so everyone was going about their day as usual. It's 5:00 p.m. earlier that day in Tomé, Chile. Clara is just shy of her 15th birthday. She's traveling by train with her older friend, we'll call her Lucy, and 3 younger girls. They're on the way to Lucy's house in the country. It's the first time Clara's ever been away from home, and it's an experience she will never forget. There were 5 of us together, 3 young girls, me, and my older friend who invited us to come with her to her house. Our train arrived at 7 p.m. I remember when we got off the train, I asked my friend, "Where do we go now?" She said, "We're going to have to walk because the people that were waiting for us have left because our train was late." But from where we got off at the train station, we had to walk so far to get to where she lived. We finally got to her house at 11 p.m. That's why I remember the train so well. The girls' train was running late. When their train finally arrived at 7 p.m., they realized their ride is gone and there's nobody there to pick them up. So they're going to have to walk to Lucy's house in the dark, all by themselves, carrying all their luggage on dirt roads, and it takes them 4 hours to get there. They finally arrived at Lucy's house around 11 p.m. Lucy and her family lived on top of a hill. Down the hill behind their house was a grape vineyard, a small house, a little church, and a garden. Lucy's son-in-law, Hinojosa, lived in that house, and he was also the pastor of the church there. By the time they got to Lucy's house, they were covered in dust. They were hungry, thirsty, and so worn out that as soon as they got inside the door, they collapsed on the floor. Lucy's mom came running out of the bedroom, surprised to see them. She immediately had them come sit at the kitchen table, and she gave them some water and something to eat, and she put a kettle on to make them some tea. Because of the ordeal they just went through, they were sitting at the table in complete silence while they chugged down their water and their food. Abuelita said that one of the younger girls was very funny and loved making people laugh. So the girls started joking around to try and lighten the mood. She soon had everyone laughing. They were having a great time. Until suddenly, the earthquake started. And the earthquake started and everything was shaking. We huddled together under a doorframe, and our suitcases, everything was getting buried. The entire house fell down around us. The roof, everything was coming down on us. We had to wait until the strong shaking stopped. And then we began to crawl to get out. The doorway was filled to the top with debris from adobe and roof tiles and everything falling to the ground around us. So we had to crawl out like cats. We survived because we stood arm in arm under the doorframe, hugging each other and crying out to the Lord. On the edge of the doorframe, it was covered with debris all the way up to the top, except for a little hole that was left where we could climb up and pull ourselves out. And the entire world was dark, so very, very dark. When the earthquake started, they immediately ran and huddled together under a door frame and cried out to the Lord as the entire house collapsed around them. They were trapped inside the door frame because both sides of it were stacked with fallen debris. But there was a small opening on one side at the very top of the frame, and they were able to climb up and pull themselves out of the rubble. When the earthquake started, it was 11:32 at night. Imagine finally climbing out of the rubble to find yourself in utter darkness. And then the despair hits you. To hear all the cries for help, the screams of agony from those injured, or from witnessing the death of loved ones and those around you, or the screams and cries of complete and utter helplessness and sorrow. As humans, the first thing we want to do immediately after tragedy is to check on our family members and to go and be with them. Clara was only 14 years old, and it was the first time she had ever been away from home. All she could think about was getting her suitcase and belongings from underneath the rubble and somehow making her way back home to Tomé to check on her family. But how? She would have to wait, because right now they needed to go check on the rest of Lucy's family down below. We wanted to see what was happening down there at the other house, but we couldn't get any of our belongings out. Our suitcases and bags, everything was covered with debris. Everything was crushed and full of dirt and grime. My dad asked, "But were you all okay?" And she says, "Yes, thank the Lord." I said, "If we can't get any of our belongings out until tomorrow, Lucy, what are we going to do?" She said, "Well, let's go see what's going on down there." And then we started to walk down to the other house below. Lucy's son-in-law, Hinojosa, was in charge down there. They had a large grape trellis, much bigger than this one. They had taken all of their beds outside and anything else they could, and they lined up their beds all together, one after the other, under the trellis. So my girlfriends and I all huddled together on a bed to try and get warm. And then Hinojosa came over, and we all prayed to the Lord right there. Behind the house, down the hill, they found that everyone from Lucy's family was okay. They had already started dragging out mattresses and anything else they could salvage from the debris, and they lined the mattresses up underneath the large grape trellis. And Clara and her friends sat huddled together as Hinojosa, the son-in-law and preacher of the church there, gathered everyone for prayer. And the shock from the situation started to settle in. There was a church service that evening at Salvador's church that was still going on at 11 p.m. Here's a photo of Salvador and Audelia's house. As you can see, the church is literally right beside their house, and they're connected via this corridor or walkway. Salvador and Audelia had a big family. They had 7 children at the time of the earthquake. A woman by the name of Luna was a very dear friend of the family. They affectionately nicknamed her Grandma Luna, and she was loved and adored by everyone. She and her daughter Eliana would often assist Audelia with taking care of the kids. Grandma Luna and Eliana would frequently spend the night even, just to help out. That night before the earthquake, Grandma Luna was at church holding Clara's 1-year-old brother, Ezequiel, when the Lord spoke to her. And Grandma Luna, she helped my mom at home. She was the one the Lord prophesied through at the church meeting the night of the earthquake. Grandma Luna was holding Ezequiel, my youngest brother, in her arms. Ezequiel was 1 year old, and the Lord prophesied that something very great is coming to your land. And very soon, he said. And the Lord would pass by her and say to her, he would say to her like this, "White garments and for you." He would say to Grandma Luna, "White garments and for you." Very soon, you are coming, you are coming, you are coming. And the Lord kept telling her and telling her. Until finally Grandma Luna shouted, "My Lord is coming, terminate the meeting. Put an end to it, put an end to it." She said it just like that, very seriously and with urgency. Remember how we spoke last time about the story in Numbers chapter 22 where God used a donkey to speak to Balaam? Well, this time, God used a person, specifically Grandma Luna, to speak to not just one person, but to a church full. The Lord appeared to her and told her that something great is coming to your land very soon, and to terminate the meeting and go home. He kept telling her these things over and over until Luna repeated them with urgency to the congregation. And everyone believed that the message was truly from God, and they quickly obeyed and left the church immediately and went home. The Lord knows my dad always went to the church meetings. He was the pastor. But that night, the Lord told him not to go. The Lord seemed to push him to go home instead. So he left work, went inside our house, and began to pray. After the prophecy, the church meeting ended immediately. Everyone left and went home. My father was already inside when my family got home. Not only did God speak to Luna that night, but he also spoke to Salvador earlier that evening. Salvador was stuck at work and was running late to the church service when God spoke to him and told him not to go. Now, this is just one of those pieces in this amazing story that can easily get overlooked. So let's think about this. Salvador was the pastor of the church, yet God was telling him not to go to his own church service and instead go straight home and pray. Salvador had so much faith and so much trust in God that he listened and quickly obeyed. He left work, went straight home, and immediately started praying until his family got home and they told him everything that had just happened during the service. Several church members lived on the hill above the church. On their way home, they came to a farmhouse that belonged to us. And these church brothers were getting close to the farmhouse when they saw a large beam of light. It was huge, like a truck has, they said. And then it started. A huge earthquake. Huge. And they froze there for a second. And then they all ran to their house because they were already close by. And all the church people arrived safely to their homes. After leaving church, Grandma Luna and her daughter Eliana went next door to Clara's house to spend the night to continue helping Abuelita with the little ones. Grandma Luna and Eliana went to sleep in 4-year-old Marta's room. And then, moments later, the earthquake started. That night, Grandma Luna came over to my family's house to sleep in my 4-year-old sister Marta's room because her daughter Eliana was asleep there with Marta. When the earthquake started, Grandma Luna left the room and went into the hallway to see what was going on, and a beam fell on Marta and Eliana's bed like this, and the bed was under the beam. The beam ended up saving them. A beam from the church next door fell on Luna. Then the entire house fell, and it fell on Luna and she was buried. Then the upper part of the church also crashed down in the same area where Luna was, and they couldn't find her or Marta or Eliana. My dad, the Lord showed him somehow, in all the debris, he found a small hatchet. And the Lord guided him from above to where he needed to start searching. And after they got Eliana out, they found Marta underneath Eliana. Eliana and Marta were half suffocated but still alive. And then my mom told my dad, "Look here. It sounds like there's a kitten. I don't know what it is, but it's screaming under the door." And it was Grandma Luna who was under there. And my dad got her out alive. They took her out. They cleaned her up. And life dawned when the day of the end came. She passed away the following morning. So why did the Lord rush them to leave the church? To save their souls. Because the church was full of people that night. The entire church fell. All of it completely collapsed. But the Lord saved them all. Except Grandma Luna. She was the only one who died. When the earthquake started, Luna jumped out of bed and ran into the hallway to see what was going on, and a beam from the church next door came down on top of her. Then the house fell on top of her. Then as the entire church started to collapse, the upper part of the church also fell on top of her, and she was completely buried. Meanwhile, a beam from the ceiling in Marta's room had fallen on Marta and Eliana's bed like this. Eliana was able to shield Marta with her body before the beam came down. Then the entire house and church fell down, and they were also completely buried. Everyone came out of the house alive, except they couldn't find 4-year-old Marta, Eliana, or Grandma Luna. I can only imagine the panic that Salvador and Abuelita must have felt at this moment. They just endured an 8.3 magnitude earthquake, and they couldn't find their 4-year-old daughter. It was around 11:30 at night, and they had no electricity, so it was completely dark. The only light they had was from the moon. And to make matters worse, the air was full of dust clouds from all the debris. In moments like these, the Bible tells us that we are to pray and seek God, to give all our worries to Him, and trust that His will is perfect, and to praise Him through it all. Salvador started praying fervently, and the Holy Spirit came upon him so strongly that he started singing as the Holy Spirit led him to a small hatchet that was miraculously just laying there in all the debris. And with that small hatchet, huge pieces of cement crumbled. And then the Lord showed him exactly where to start searching. And he was able to use that hatchet to chop through the wooden beam that had fallen on Eliana and Marta. And he pulled them both out to safety. Because of how the beam hit the bed, it acted as a shield. The beam took the brunt of all the debris coming down, the roof tiles, the adobe, the cement blocks. And because Eliana covered Marta with her body, she saved little Marta's life. Soon after, Abuelita heard what sounded like a kitten underneath where a doorway used to be, and it was there they pulled out Grandma Luna. She was barely alive, and sadly, she passed away a few hours later. The Lord had just spoke through Luna at church about 30 minutes before the earthquake, and everything she prophesied came true. He told her something very great is coming to your land very soon, and to terminate the meeting and go home. God was protecting His people. The church was full that night, and He knew that the church was going to collapse in the earthquake. So He had Luna tell everyone to leave immediately and go home. Thankfully, they believed and obeyed, because if they had still been at church, they would have all perished. The other part of the prophecy that the Lord spoke to Luna was, very soon you are coming, white garments and for you. We now know this part was specifically for Luna, letting her know that she would be going home to be with Jesus very soon. Grandma Luna was like family, and they mourned greatly over her death. Little did they know that they had just endured the deadliest earthquake in all of Chile's history. As the magnitude of the situation started to kick in, Salvador was soon struck with the pain of not knowing if his daughter Clara was alive or dead. All he knew was that he had to go and find her. But first, he had to bury and lay dear Grandma Luna to rest. 2, 3, 4 days had passed, and me and my sisters were suffering because we didn't know anything about anything. All we kept hearing from people was that Tomei was completely gone, and that the ocean had come up so there was flooding, and that there was a ton of fires everywhere. And we couldn't communicate with anyone. And my dad was suffering and crying for me because he didn't know if I was okay. I can see the desperation in my abuelita's face. She's reliving the heartache and the sadness and the helplessness she felt. She was so close to her dad, and she missed him and her family so much that it was tearing her up inside, not knowing if they were okay. She didn't know if she would ever see any of them alive again. She was so desperate to go home that she told Lucy she was willing to just walk home by herself to Tomei. Lucy heard there was a doctor in the next town over that was picking up and transporting injured patients to and from his office. So Lucy came up with a plan that they could just try and catch a ride with him. So early the next morning, the girls walked to the doctor's office hoping to catch him. They waited all day for him, but the doc never showed up. It was getting late, so Lucy suggested that they should just sleep there until the morning. Just then, Hinojosa arrived with wonderful news. He had ordered an Uber driver of oxen and carts that would take Clara home at 11 p.m. tomorrow night, and the other 4 girls could travel with her. Clara was so happy. Her prayers had been answered, and she was finally going home. They stayed there that night outside the doctor's office and made the long trip back to Lucy's house the next day. But on the way back, God had a special message for Clara. And so the next day, we started walking back to their house, and I saw a vision. I think it's the only vision I've ever seen. The ground was wet and muddy, and I saw bicycle tracks in the mud. As soon as I stood up to leave, I saw bicycle tracks on the ground. Look at the bicycle tracks. There's got to be bicycles around. But the others didn't see them at all. And I told them, someone is at the house who has come to look for us because I can see them there. They said, there's no such thing. You're crazy in the head. There's nothing there. But I saw them. The tracks, the tracks. Here, look at the tracks. But the others, none of them saw them. Later on, when we were getting close to the house, we came upon a little creek that we had to pass through to get to the other side. And I looked down and saw that the tracks were passing through the water. Look, how can you all not see that? I asked them. You're acting crazy, they said. My desire to go home was overwhelming. And so, I took off running. I jumped and ran into the water, and I ran thinking that those waiting at the house were going to leave me behind. Then, Hinojosa called out to me to go pick some peas and do whatever you need to do to get ready to leave for Tomei, because at 11 o'clock tonight, we are leaving. As soon as they got back to the house, Hinojosa got the oxen and carts ready for them to leave that night at 11 p.m. All the girls needed to do was collect some food from the garden and wait till it was time to go. But God had an even better plan. My sisters and I had walked up a little hill like this. We were digging up vegetables to take on our trip, peas and other things. I was singing. I was so happy. I was happy because we were going to leave. And what happened is, I'm walking around collecting peas in an apron, and I feel something coming. I feel something coming. I look up and see my dad and my 11-year-old brother Bayuca. And oh, I threw away my peas and took off running. And I ran to my dad, and then he saw me and recognized me. They all arrived so tired. There was a few brothers with them. In total, there were five men. They were filthy, so they took off their clothes and jumped into the water. It was so far to walk from Tomé. They came on foot. They didn't come by bicycle either, like in my vision. It was such a great joy when they arrived. And here we were just happy because the cart was already there. The vehicles were ready. And that evening after my dad arrived, we made a fire and boiled some water for drinks. It was nice to be able to have a hot drink because all of us had gone 4 or 5 days without eating anything, nothing. No one had the strength or the energy to even raise a hand. And we all sat there and drank a little bit of our hot drinks. And everyone there began to pray to the Lord, crying, praying. Then we all cried some more. And we left the next day. Salvador, Peyuca, and 3 men from their church came to search for Clara. They walked between 45 to 60 miles on foot all the way from Tomé through mud and uneven terrain. In Abuelita's vision, God knew that for her, the message would be clearer to show her bicycle tracks and not footprints in order to tell her that people were on the way to pick her up and take her home. They were supposed to leave that night at 11 p.m., but because the men were so exhausted from walking all that way, they waited until the next day to leave. The next day we left. We were already going by oxen cart, so the trip was much easier for my dad and everyone. On the way home, there was an unbearable heat. It was painful. Oh, so hot. When we were entering Tomé, all the people were sleeping in the streets. Some with blankets there to cover themselves. But it was an awful sight, something so terrible to see. It was horrible. And to get home and see everything crumbled to the ground, there was no way to sleep. We didn't know how to live. People walked for 3 months, 4 months, with what they had on. There was no way to wash yourself. No way to do anything, nothing. It was horrible, terrible, so terrible. For at least 2 months, people were still walking around like they were in a dream, like zombies. You suffer a lot from something like that. I would never want to go through that again. It was so awful. 1 year after filming this, Abuelita lost her home to another earthquake. She should have been at home in bed asleep at the time the earthquake started at 3:34 a.m. But she was 250 miles away, staying at her daughter's house. When she returned home to see the damage, the roof had come down directly on top of her bed. If she had been home that night, she would have perished. Food aid eventually came, along with a huge influx of men looking for construction jobs to help the towns with rebuilding. One of those men ended up being a man by the name of Pedro, and he would eventually become my abuelito, or my grandpa. I will cover that in my next video. The story of how they met and why they met is a beautiful one, full of miracles. There's an angel that makes many appearances. There's healing. There's humor. I can't wait to share it with you. You won't want to miss it. Thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe and share this with your friends and family. And if you have a miracle or Godwinks story and you'd like to be on the podcast, send me an email at fishmiracle.podcast@proton.me. Thank you all so much, and God bless.